Today we are talking about an immigration fraud crisis happening in Canada that seemingly nobody wants to discuss. And here's the shocking part. This is not just one scandal. It's multiple immigration scandals happening at the same time, creating what can only be described as a super crisis. The latest case involves an international student from India studying in Canada that has now been sentenced to prison in the United States for his role in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. And the disturbing reality is that stories like this keep happening. I'm Cantin-Nantel. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we will break down the latest case, examine a broader pattern of fraud with Canada's international student system, explain how the Liberal government paved the way for this to happen, and I'll bring you an update on the Indian students in Calgary that are protesting, demanding to stay in Canada, including new footage that you need to see. So without further ado, let's get to it. But first, be sure you are subscribed if you're not already. Did you know in my latest video, 90% of those who watched it were not subscribed? So go hit that button. I'm trying to get to 25,000 subscribers. Hype and like the video, hit the notification bell, and consider getting a paid channel membership for less than $5 a month because I don't take any subsidies from the federal government, and I never will.
Journalism and commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
Rebuild the foundation. You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged with.
Part 1, the fraud. On July 29th, the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Wisconsin put out this press release. Indian national sentenced to 48 months imprisonment for conspiracy to commit money laundering. Reading now from CTV News, an Indian man who came to Canada on a student visa has been sentenced to prison in the U.S. for his involvement in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting seniors, American officials say. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Wisconsin said in a press release Wednesday that a federal judge sentenced 22-year-old Roshan Shah to 48 months in prison for conspiring to commit money laundering. According to court records, Shah, who is a citizen of India, was attending college in Canada on a student visa. He entered the United States on a visitor visa to collect fraud proceeds. The release reads, co-conspirators in India called victims and convinced them that their identities had been used to commit crimes. The victims were led to believe that they had to surrender cash or gold to a federal agent impersonated by Shah for safekeeping. Officials did not specify the province in Canada where Shah was living or the post-secondary institution where he was a student. In total, Shah collected more than $3.7 million from 15 victims across multiple U.S. states. Now, this is a pretty shocking story, but it's only the latest example of international students in Canada that are committing fraud, that are behaving badly. In fact, this is part of a larger trend of much greater problems. So, reading here from the Hub, Auditor General fires torpedo at Liberals' mishandling of international student fraud. Let's start with the numbers. 153,324. That is how many international students the federal government identified in just 2 years as potentially violating the conditions of their study permits. And how many cases was the same government capable of investigating in a given year? Roughly 2,000. And here is a graph. So you see over 150,000 potentially non-compliant students, 4,057 investigations launched. Of this, there were 3,105 completed. And of that, 1,400 students confirmed to be studying. Here, 1,654 students did not respond to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So they're like, nah, we're not going to bother with this. There were 50 students found to be non-compliant. Here, there was 957 investigations that were just canceled, and there are 37 still in progress. But again, this is out of 153,324 4. Out of 3,105 completed investigations, you found 50 cases of noncompliance. Imagine how many of the 1,654 are noncompliant. And then imagine if you take this and you applied it to all of this, the big number. This is literally what we're seeing here, the 50 confirmed to be noncompliant, is the tip of the iceberg. This is literally a can of worms waiting to be opened. The amount of fraud, abuse, noncompliance here is absolutely staggering. I mean, my goodness, this is truly incredible. And it gets worse because on top of international students committing fraud, there are also fraudsters that are targeting international students. For example, check out this piece. Organized criminals target international students. Canadian study permits are being misappropriated by crime rings at a massive scale, threatening the integrity of post-secondary institutions and the aspirations of international students. This is an article from University Affairs. The problem is long-standing and widespread. In 2023 alone, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada identified nearly 1,550 permit applications based on fake letters of acceptance. Some came from bona fide establishments whose documents were tampered with, others from fictitious institutions fabricated to con students to fool the authorities. And I'm not done. From CTV News now, 2 Ontario men face fraud, immigration-related charges after alleged tuition scam on international students. The international student fraud has gotten so bad that it's gotten international coverage. Here is Routers. Canadian authorities charged an Indian man for issuing fraudulent university letters of acceptance to Indian students and other immigration-related criminal offenses. So basically, you have international students committing fraud, and then you have other people committing fraud on international students. So it's a case of double fraud, and all of it is a pure disgrace. Part 2, how we got here. This is where it's important to remind everyone the complicity of the Liberal government in all of this. In 2018, Canada had 500,000 international students. By 2023, that had doubled to 1 million. And in Canadian public colleges, the number of international students in 1 decade increased by 400%. Now, as where these students were coming from, this is from Statista, they were overwhelmingly from India. Almost half of them were from India. And there's this great article in the Macdonald Laurier Institute, which is a very credible think tank, highlighting how we got here. Reading from this article, Canada's immigration system has undergone a dramatic transformation over the past 20 years. Once a tightly controlled process that separated education and work permits for foreigners with clear boundaries for temporary residency has gradually evolved into a complex pipeline where international students have become de facto economic immigrants. What began as a simple accommodation for a relatively small number of foreign students has evolved into a strategy to attract talent for potential immigration purposes, generating huge revenues for educational institutions, and then expanded into a vast, loosely regulated system that now maintains over 1 million international students on temporary status. The shift has brought unintended consequences, growing exploitation of workers, increased strain on public services, and a surge in refugee claims. So in the 1990s, there was a points system for immigration to Canada. Points were awarded to an applicant's level of education, their ability to speak English and French, the type of occupation that they had for training and experience. And immigration lawyers, like the person who wrote this piece, used to travel the world to meet potential applicants that might garner enough points to qualify. But those days are over. So basically, Canada used to only let in the best of the best from other countries, aka the actual doctors and engineers. And that changed over time. And with the expansion of international students, which became very dramatic under Trudeau, we basically started letting anybody. We started letting in villagers from India to come and study at these colleges that aren't very good colleges. And they were basically only coming here to work at Tim Hortons and using this as a pathway to immigrate to Canada. These are people, a lot of them, that would have never been accepted under Canada's old points system, which was one of the best immigration systems in the world that welcomed the best of the other countries. And this was made worse by Trudeau because Justin Trudeau removed a previous 20-hour-a-week work cap, allowing an international student to come to Canada to study, but then work full-time hours at a place like Tim Hortons. How does that make sense? Part 3, international students behaving badly. Under the point system, Canada used to let in the best of the best from all over the world. But nowadays, we're letting in some of the lesser good people. I'm not saying everybody who's coming in is not good, but it is a fact that we have let in people into Canada in the last decade that would have never been admitted to Canada before, and that has come with some consequences. For example, this case in Saskatoon, international student caught with kilograms of drugs, and this individual was a 26-year-old international student from India. Or this very disturbing story from Global News that some parts I can't even read because I might get demonetized if I do. Peel Regional Police say they have arrested a 22-year-old international student in connection to a string of sexual assaults against women in their early 20s who were waiting at bus stops and accepted a ride from someone posing as a ride-share driver. The suspect spoke Punjabi to the victims in all 3 incidents, and police officers arrested a 22-year-old man from Brampton who was an international student from India. Other international students are literally posting videos on social media of them driving recklessly, something that is putting the lives of Canadian citizens at risk. I have 2 words for this: arrest and deport. This is simply unacceptable. You are a guest in our country and you're driving recklessly, putting the lives of Canadian children, Canadian seniors, Canadian citizens, as well as your fellow international students at risk. This is unacceptable. The next video is even more shocking. It's another international student, and this one is allegedly drunk driving while speeding like a maniac, and he too posted it on social media. Watch. Part 4, temporary must mean temporary. Let's now take a look at the conditions that come with the privilege of being an international student in Canada, and they are the following. This is from the Government of Canada website. As a study permit holder, you must be enrolled in a designated learning institution, show you're actively pursuing your studies, apply to extend your permit if you want to change schools, end your studies if you no longer meet the requirements of being a student, and most importantly, leave Canada when your study permit expires. The idea behind the study permit is you're coming to study. That's the whole point of being an international student or an exchange student, etc. But in Calgary, we now have international students from India that are protesting to demand a right to stay here. We covered this last week. If you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to do so. And here are some of the latest clips from that. Let's watch them. I can't help but notice that there's garbage on the ground. Sorry, I can't help but notice that. That bothers me. I'm OCD. They've also been sleeping on mattresses on the sidewalk. So as you can see, there's a good group of them, and they're all on the sidewalk with mattresses and demanding what they call fair policies. You have had cases of international students who don't want to go back to their countries once they're done studying, that they're claiming asylum in Canada. And the National Post reported last October that as many as 47,000 foreign students may now be in Canada illegally. Furthermore, from Juno News, 4.9 million visas expired, and the Liberals have no clue how many overstayed. Reading here, this is from Cosman, Georgia. As of December 31st, 2025, nearly 5 million temporary visas in Canada expired, and the government doesn't know how many of those people became illegal immigrants by refusing to leave. And 1.4 million work and study permits will expire in 2026 as part of Canada's plan to lower temporary residence. Because to the Liberals' credit, they have cut back. Once it became out of control, they have cut back the number of temporary residents and permanent residents. They have been cutting back, but there are a lot that are still in the country that will need to go back because their visas will have expired. And Canada is dealing with an unemployment crisis, a housing crisis, a jobs crisis, etc. Now, Canada has ramped up deportations. There's about 400 people a week being deported right now. Reading here from the Walrus, Canada's Immigration Enforcement Agency is ramping up deportations and hoping to sustain an annual target of 20,000 over the next couple of years. The Canada Border Services Agency deported 22,500 foreign nationals in 2025, the highest annual total in its history, and is currently removing approximately 400 individuals from Canada each week, an agency spokesperson told the journalist in an interview. That said, there is currently no coordinated, proactive federal strategy to physically remove or transition the millions of people whose temporary visas are expiring. And as exposed by Michelle Rempel-Garner, Conservative Member of Parliament, the Trudeau and Carney Liberals have been telling people that have come on student temporary visas that it's a pathway to long-term living in Canada. Reading here, over the past decade, the federal Liberal government has done everything possible to incentivize foreign nationals to come to Canada on temporary resident visas with the intention of never having to leave. Worse still, rather than signaling that those who plan to overstay will face consequences, it has signaled that their visa overstays and systemic abuse are effectively welcomed. For example, the Liberals' 2019 to 2024 International Education Survey spent nearly $150 million of your tax dollars, by the way, to advertise a framing that promoted a study, work, stay continuum for foreign students. And she also notes, when it comes to the millions of people in Canada with no status or with expired or expiring visas, precious few have been removed, and the Liberals have given no sign that they plan to scale up capacity to enforce immigration law unless immediately corrected. This continued abuse of spirit and letter of immigration law and the resulting unfettered opening of Canada's borders will almost certainly be judged by future historians as the core reason why Canada's pluralism failed. So, to summarize, we have issues with international students in Canada committing fraud. We have lots of cases of non-compliance. We have students who are overstaying their visas and others that are protesting, demanding the right to stay. And we've had fraudsters target prospective international students on top of that, creating a cesspool of immigration fraud in Canada, all permitted under the Liberal government. And this is why I'm asking you to sign a petition in the link below to stop immigration fraud in Canada and enforce the law. Nations need to have laws, and those laws need to be enforced. That is just simple common sense. It's something that is done all over the world, and it is time that we do the same in Canada. If we want to be respected, we need to have laws, and we need to enforce those laws. Anyways, this sums up today's podcast. Those are my opinions. I want to know what you think, so put them down below in the comments. Be sure to hype and like the video, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you very soon. And until then, God bless.